I kept my eyes fixed on the pressure gauge as we descended deeper into the Tonga Trench. The Mariana Explorer's hull creaked softly around us, the sound barely noticeable over the steady hum of the propulsion systems. Each 100 meters we dropped made the numbers on my display tick higher, the pressure outside building to crushing levels. 8,000 meters was our target depth, almost 5 miles beneath the ocean's surface. Integrity readings all in the green, I announced, adjusting the salvage control panel before me. The submarine's reinforced titanium hull was handling the pressure well, but I never took that for granted. At these depths, even a minor failure meant certain death. Captain Rostova stood in the cramped control room, her back straight as she addressed us. The blue lighting from the displays highlighted her features. "Listen up," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Our mission is to locate and recover the KH-13 satellite that crashed 3 days ago. According to naval intelligence, it contains sensitive nuclear components that cannot be left on the ocean floor." She pulled up a 3D rendering on the main screen. "The satellite's nuclear power housing is intact, but we need to secure it before the casing degrades further." I looked at the satellite schematic. The KH-13 was a spy satellite, though no one had officially confirmed it. The civilian weather monitoring cover story was weak, but we didn't ask questions. The pay for this salvage job was triple our normal rate. Looking around our tight control room, I watched each crew member at their station. To my left, Edwin hunched over the navigation console, his fingers dancing across the controls with practiced precision. His eyes never left the display as he made minute adjustments to our descent trajectory. Yasmin sat at the sonar station, headphones on, eyes closed. She could easily tell natural ocean sounds from artificial ones, which was vital for the mission. Across the room, Derek checked and rechecked the life support systems, his broad shoulders tense as he monitored oxygen levels and hull integrity. Next to him, Sophia quietly organized her medical supplies, preparing for any potential injuries. Deep-sea salvage was dangerous work, and we'd all needed her expertise at some point. 8,000 meters, I called out, as the depth indicator hit our target. Hull pressure nominal. Almost immediately, Yasmin's eyes snapped open. "Contact," she announced, adjusting her sonar settings. "Large metallic object at bearing 045, range 200 meters. Signature matches our target profile." I ran through the salvage checklist, testing the external manipulator arms. The claws responded to my commands, and the recovery cradle was ready in the external bay. "Take us in closer, Edwin," Captain Rostova ordered, moving to stand behind Yasmin's station. "Thomas, prepare to deploy arms once we're in position." "Ready on your mark, Captain," I replied, fingers poised over the controls. Edwin led us ahead. The lights pierced the darkness, revealing a cloud of silt and marine snow. "Visual contact," I said, being the first to spot it through the forward viewport. The satellite had come to rest in a small depression on the ocean floor, partially buried in silt. What surprised me was how intact it appeared. Its cylindrical body was dented and scratched, but the main structure had survived re-entry and impact remarkably well. "Beginning salvage operation," I announced, deploying the external manipulator arms. The mechanical limbs extended from our hull, reaching toward the fallen satellite. As I moved the arms closer, I noticed something unusual around the satellite. Something shifted behind the wreckage, but in the murky water, it was hard to tell what it was. "Seeing some unusual current patterns near the target," I said, but didn't stop the operation. "Probably just water displacement from our approach." The primary mechanical claw reached the satellite, its metal fingers gently closing around the upper housing. The moment contact was made, I saw it. Something massive unfurling from behind the satellite. What I'd taken for silk clouds was actually a living thing, coiled around our target. "Wait, there's something," I started to say. Before I could finish, A giant tentacle, easily 20 feet long and thick as a tree trunk, whipped out from the darkness and wrapped itself around one of our manipulator arms. The creature yanked violently, shaking our submarine like a dog with a toy. Warning alarms blared as we were jolted sideways, sending us all sprawling across the control room. I grabbed the edge of my console as the submarine lurched again, my fingers slipping on the metal as I hauled myself back into position. Alarms blared through the control room, red warning lights bathing everyone in their glow. I looked up at the main viewport just in time to see more massive tentacles emerging from the murky depths, unfurling like living ropes. "Everyone secure yourselves," I shouted, recognition dawning as I got a clearer view of what attacked us. "It's a Tusoteuthis, a giant squid, at least 40 feet long." "That's impossible," Edwin called out, clinging to his navigation chair. "Those things went extinct millions of years ago." I didn't have time to debate paleontology. Another tentacle, thicker than the first, shot through the water and wrapped itself around our midsection with frightening speed. The viewport darkened as something massive moved across it. Then I froze. An eye, round and glossy like a dinner plate, stared directly at me through the reinforced glass. Its pupil contracted slightly as it examined our vessel, displaying an unsettling intelligence. "It's looking at us," I said, unable to look away from that ancient, alien gaze. Captain Rostova steadied herself against her command station. "Bennett, engage reverse thrusters, maximum power. We need to break free." I snapped back to attention, fingers flying across the propulsion controls. The engines whined in protest as I pushed them beyond recommended output levels. The whole submarine shuddered as the thrusters fought against the creature's grip. "It's not working," I reported, checking the external camera feeds. "The grip is actually tightening." The vessel groaned under the increasing pressure, metal creaking in ways that made my stomach drop. Red indicators flashed across my console, hull integrity sensors picking up stress points where the tentacles squeezed. The readouts showed increasing pressure on 3 different sections. "I can't free the manipulator arms," I said, trying every override procedure I knew. "The primary hydraulics are completely pinned. I've got no response from any of the emergency releases." On the main screen, the external camera showed our predicament with horrible clarity. The creature was pulling us closer to the satellite, using its tentacles to drag us through the water. As we were drawn nearer, I saw something I'd missed before. An enormous hooked beak nestled among the mass of tentacles, partly open as if ready to test our hull's resistance. "It thinks we're trying to steal its heat source," I realized aloud, the pieces clicking into place. The satellite's nuclear core is still warm. In these freezing depths, it must be like a bonfire to this thing. "Bennett, we need options," Captain Rostova said, her voice steady despite everything. Derek's voice cut through the chaos from his station. "Hull integrity dropping to 82% in Section 3. We're looking at potential breach points if pressure increases any further." I frantically scanned my control panel, looking for anything we could use. Most systems were locked down or disabled by the creature's attack, but not all of them. The secondary tool system indicator was still green. "The laser cutter," I said, pointing to the small auxiliary arm mounted beneath the main manipulators. "It's still operational. We normally use it for precision work, but at full power." Captain Rostova understood immediately. "How close can you get to the tentacles wrapped around our hull?" "Close enough," I replied, already activating the secondary system. "If I can target the tentacles closest to us, maybe we can convince it to let go." She nodded once, decisively. "Do it. Target the tentacles in contact with our hull first." I extended the laser tool, preparing to target the thick tentacles wrapped around our hull. Just as I was about to fire, something in the viewport caught my eye. Beyond the writhing mass of the creature, where the satellite lay partially obscured, I spotted a critical detail I'd missed before. "Wait," I said, my finger pulling back from the firing control. "Look at the satellite." Through the murky water, illuminated by our external lights, I could see a damaged section of the power housing. A partially severed cable dangled where the squid's massive body made direct contact with the satellite. The implications hit me immediately. "Captain," I said, turning to Rostova, "the nuclear battery is still active in that satellite. See that exposed cable? The squid is touching both the power source and our submarine right now." Rostova's eyes narrowed as she processed this information. "You're saying—" "We're all part of a circuit," I explained quickly, the idea forming as I spoke. "If I cut through that cable completely instead of attacking the tentacles directly, the current from the nuclear battery will discharge through the creature's body." "Like an electric fence," Rostova said, nodding with understanding. "Exactly, but much more powerful. That battery puts out enough juice to power the satellite's communication systems for years." Derek looked up from his station. "Hull integrity at 76% and dropping." I was about to respond when a thunderous impact rocked the entire submarine. Everyone grabbed for support as the vessel lurched violently to one side. Through the viewport, I saw the source of the impact. The squid's massive parrot-like beak had struck the reinforced glass, leaving behind a spiderweb of cracks that stretched across the surface. Sophia screamed from behind me, the sound cutting through the blare of alarms. Across the control room, Yasmin had both hands clamped on her station, knuckles white with fear, her eyes fixed on the cracking viewport. "Bennett, do it now." Captain Rostova's voice cut through the chaos, steady and commanding despite the danger. "Target that cable before that thing breaks through." I swiveled the external camera view, aligning the laser's targeting system with the exposed cable. The crosshairs on my display jumped and wavered as the submarine continued to shake under the creature's assault. Another strike from the beak sent tremors through the control room. "Firing," I announced, pressing the activation control. The laser fired, its beam cutting through the water toward the exposed cable. In the murky depths, I could track its path, a concentrated line of light heading toward its target. For a long, awful second, I thought I might miss. The submarine lurched again, and the beam wavered. "Come on," I whispered, making a tiny adjustment to the targeting. Then the laser connected. The beam sliced through the remaining insulation and metal of the cable with surprising ease. I watched through the external camera as the cut was completed, the two ends of the cable now floating free. What happened next was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Electricity, invisible but unmistakable in its effect, coursed through the massive squid's body. Its entire form went rigid, tentacles extending outward in all directions like a grotesque star. The creature's body convulsed violently, contracting and expanding in unnatural spasms. Through the cracked viewport, I could see its skin changing color rapidly, flashing from deep red to pale white and back again as the current overloaded its nervous system. I gripped my station with white knuckles as the submarine rocked violently beneath me. The dying squid's body continued its electric dance, each spasm hammering against our hull like a battering ram. The overhead lights flickered, casting strobing shadows across the control room. Everyone around me had found something to hold on to as we weathered the creature's death throes. "Hold steady," Captain Rostova called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. Gradually, the impacts grew less intense. Through the cracked viewport, I watched as the tentacles that had been locked around our hull began to loosen. One by one, they slipped away, drifting limply in the water around us. The massive body of the squid slowly rotated in the harsh beam of our external floodlights, no longer the powerful predator that had attacked us moments ago. but a lifeless husk tumbling into the abyss. I focused on the damage readouts on my monitor. Red warnings had changed to yellow and green. I ran a diagnostic and checked each system. "We're still seaworthy," I said, looking over the reports. "Hull integrity is at 68%. Life support is working. Propulsion systems are functional but under stress. We need to start our ascent soon. I wouldn't recommend staying down here more than another 40 minutes." Derek nodded from his station. "I agree. We have microfractures in the aft port quadrant. They're not critical yet, but the structure will keep weakening under this pressure." Captain Rostova stood firm at the center of the command deck, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow of the main status display. "What about our primary objective? Status of the KH-13. I switched to the external camera feeds, cycling through each angle until I found what we were looking for. The satellite was still there, though our encounter with the squid had knocked it partially into the seafloor silt. One solar panel array was completely buried, and the communication dish was bent at an awkward angle. "Target is still in position, Captain," I said, zooming in on the satellite. "It's been jostled into the sediment, but the main housing appears intact. The nuclear battery has completely discharged. Our friend saw to that. But we can still recover the hardware. The guidance systems alone are worth the trip." Rostova stepped closer to my station, studying the feed with narrowed eyes. "Can we still retrieve it with our manipulator systems?" I ran a systems check on the external arms. The primary manipulator is at 60% power on the main hydraulics. Secondary systems are all good. We can do it, but it will take some finesse. "Proceed with recovery," Rostova ordered, returning to her command position. "Let's finish what we came here to do and get back to the surface." I nodded and turned back to my control panel. Redeploying manipulator arms now. My hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, extending the mechanical arms once more. This time I moved them with deliberate slowness, my eyes constantly flicking between the camera feeds and the darkness beyond our viewport. The memory of those tentacles emerging from nowhere kept my nerves on edge. "Yasmin, anything on sonar?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the controls. "Nothing moving within 500 meters, she replied, her voice steadier now. "Just us, and a whole lot of nothing." Edwin chimed in from navigation. "Holding steady at 8,003 meters, current patterns normal." I guided the manipulator arms toward the satellite, hyper-aware of every shadow, every shift in the silt clouds. The mechanical claws approached the KH-13's main housing, and I adjusted the grip position to account for the partially buried state. "Almost there," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. The primary claw made contact with the satellite's frame, and I held my breath, half expecting another nightmare to come lunging from the darkness. Nothing happened. I exhaled slowly and continued the operation, securing the grip and testing the hold. "Primary grasp confirmed," I reported, deploying secondary arm for stabilization. The second mechanical arm extended smoothly, grabbing the opposite side of the satellite. With both claws firmly attached, I initiated the tethering sequence. Cable spools unwound from the submarine's external bay, and the automated systems locked them to secure points on the satellite's frame. "Tethers attached and locked," I announced. "We're good to go, Captain." "Excellent work," Rostova said. "Begin ascent procedures. Let's go home." I activated the retrieval sequence, watching as the cables went taut and the satellite began to lift from its resting place. Silt clouds swirled around it as it broke free from the seafloor. I adjusted our ballast, and the submarine began its slow, steady climb toward the surface. As the control room buzzed with ascent operations, I thought about the creature we had encountered. A Tusoteuthis, something that went extinct millions of years ago. Yet there it was, real and terrifyingly alive. I couldn't shake the memory of that massive eye staring through our viewport. There was something in that gaze, not just hunger or aggression, but a spark of intelligence, an awareness looking back at us. It recognized us as intruders, competitors for its heat source. It made decisions. The way it wrapped around that satellite, drawn to the warmth of its nuclear core, made me wonder what other strange things might be waiting in the dark depths below us. What other extinct species might have found refuge in the trenches, evolving in isolation for millennia? And what else those ancient eyes might have seen? I focused on the ascent readouts as we climbed through the water. The digital display showed our depth decreasing: 8,000 meters, 7,995, 7,990. Each number a small victory as we moved away from the trench floor. The satellite hung beneath us, secured by the manipulator arms and tethers, its damaged nuclear housing now safely discharged. That was unlike anything I've seen, I said, breaking the silence in the control room. My hands moved across the console, making adjustments to our ascent vector. Captain Rostova stood beside me, her face still tight with concentration. In 15 years of deep water operations, I've never encountered a creature like that. Not even close. You think there might be more down there? I asked, unable to shake the image of those ancient eyes staring back at me. Other things we've never classified, living in isolation? I hope not, she said quietly. But we need to include this in our report. She walked to her command station, checking the retrieval metrics on her screen. The biological implications are significant. I let out a short, humorless laugh. You really think the report will mention the squid? $5 says all they care about is getting their $100 million satellite back. Rostova didn't answer immediately. She knew as well as I did how these things worked. The recovery of classified technology would overshadow any biological discovery, no matter how unprecedented. "Captain," Edwin called from his navigation station, his voice tight. "I'm getting unusual readings from deeper in the trench." My head snapped up. What kind of readings? "Large mass displacements," he said, adjusting his instruments. "Multiple signatures." I glanced at Yasmin, adjusting her sonar equipment, her face lit by the blue glow of the screens. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. "Confirmed," she said, pressing her headphones tighter against her ears. "Multiple large objects moving beneath us. At least 3 distinct signatures, possibly more. They're coming up from deeper in the trench." My stomach nodded as I turned back to my controls. "Increasing ascent rate," I said, pushing more power to the vertical thrusters. The submarine vibrated as we shot upward. "Bennett, what's our hull status?" Rostova asked, her calm voice belying the tension in the room. Derek spoke up from his station. "Hull integrity has stabilized at 87%. The damaged sections are holding, but I wouldn't recommend any rapid maneuvers. We're compromised, but stable." I watched our depth meter tick downward faster now, 7,800, 7,790, but not nearly fast enough for my comfort. "Maintain our current course and speed," Rostova ordered, her eyes on the tactical display. "Whatever's down there, our priority is delivering this satellite to the surface." "Yes, Captain," I replied, fighting the urge to push our ascent rate even higher. The submarine could handle more thrust, but with our damaged hull and the satellite in tow, we were already pushing our safety margins. A sudden tremor ran through the vessel, different from the mechanical vibration of our engines. It felt like a pressure wave, something large displacing water beneath us. "What was that?" Rostova demanded. I didn't answer right away. My eyes were drawn to the cracked viewport where our lights revealed movement below. Large shapes passed beneath us, their bodies and tentacles shifting as they propelled upward. "More squids," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Bigger ones." Through the damaged viewport, I saw another form glide into view, then another. Their skin reflected our lights differently than the surrounding water, giving off a faint glow. They moved purposefully, circling beneath us, drawn by the commotion of our earlier battle or the energy signature from the satellite. I kept my eyes locked on the shapes moving below us, their enormous bodies gliding through the water with unsettling grace. We'd already tangled with one prehistoric squid and barely survived. Now there were more of them, bigger ones, circling beneath us like sharks that had caught the scent of blood. "Status report," Rostova called out, her voice cutting through the tension. "Ascending steadily," I replied, forcing my attention back to the control panels. "Passing 5,500 meters now." Edwin nodded from his station. "Navigation stable, maintaining vertical trajectory." I watched the depth meter tick down steadily. 5,300, 5,200, 5,100. The instant we hit the 5,000-meter mark, a shrill alarm pierced the control room. Red warning lights flashed across my console as the hull integrity system registered a critical change. "What now?" Rostova demanded, gripping the back of my chair. I scanned the readouts, then looked up at the main viewport. A thin line was spreading across the already damaged glass, branching out like a lightning bolt frozen in time. "Fresh crack forming on the viewport," I announced, my stomach tightening. "The pressure differential is putting stress on the damaged section." Derek's fingers flew across his systems panel. "Captain, we've got power fluctuations across multiple subsystems. The squid attack must have damaged more than we thought. Primary power bus is dropping to 80% capacity." "Can we compensate?" Rostova asked, her face grim in the pulsing red emergency lights. "We need to reroute power to essential systems," I said, already moving to the engineering console next to Derek. "Life support, propulsion, and hull integrity monitors take priority." I pulled up the power management interface and began the delicate work of redistributing our remaining power. With Derek guiding me through the subsystem diagnostics, we managed to establish a stable configuration, though several secondary systems had to be shut down completely. "How are our friends below?" I called to Yasmin without looking up from my work. She adjusted her headphones, concentrating on the sonar readings. "They're still following, but falling behind as we rise. Distance increasing to 700 meters now. 800. That was something at least. I moved back to my primary station and checked our ascent rate. The numbers weren't good. "We're slowing down," I said, frowning at the display. Vertical speed dropping by 12%. I switched to the external camera feeds and spotted the issue immediately. The satellite tethers were creating significant drag, pulling at an angle that counteracted our upward momentum. The damaged KH-13 was acting like an anchor. "Captain," I turned to Rostova, who was studying the structural damage reports. "The satellite tether is causing too much drag. It's slowing our ascent considerably. With the hull compromised and power systems unstable, we might need to consider—" "We are not jettisoning that satellite, Bennett," Rostova cut me off, her voice leaving no room for debate. The mission parameters were clear. That nuclear housing must be recovered. "With respect, Captain, our hull integrity is failing. We're leaking power, and those creatures might decide to catch up to us. The satellite is putting unnecessary strain on—" "The satellite stays with us, Mr. Bennett," she said, each word like ice. "Adjust your systems accordingly and maintain the salvage." I wanted to argue further but knew it would be pointless. Instead, I nodded stiffly and turned back to my console, adjusting the vertical thrusters to compensate for the additional drag. Behind me, Derek and Sophia had pulled an emergency kit from beneath a storage panel and were moving toward the cracked viewport. "Hull sealant," Derek explained as he caught my glance. "Temporary measure, but it might buy us some time." I watched as they applied the thick, polymer-based compound along the crack. It was supposed to harden rapidly under pressure, forming a temporary seal that could hold until proper repairs could be made, if it worked. While they worked, I noticed a bead of water forming at the center point of the crack. Then another. Small droplets began to collect along the fissure despite the sealant Derek and Sophia were applying. "Water's coming through," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "The crack is still expanding." Sophia pressed more sealant into the gap. "The pressure differential is too great. The sealant can't form a proper bond." A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with fear. The air temperature in the control room had dropped noticeably. I checked the environmental controls and found the cabin temperature falling steadily. "Life support systems are faltering," I announced. "Temperature regulation is failing. We're down to 16 degrees Celsius and dropping." "We need to contact the surface," Rostova said, turning to Yasmin. "Status on communications?" Yasmin shook her head. "Standard communications are offline with the power rerouting. We'll need to use the emergency beacon." I moved to Yasmin's station to help establish the connection. The emergency communication system was designed to function on minimal power, using compressed data packets to transmit basic information to the surface support vessel. "Setting up emergency protocol 7, I said, typing commands into Yasmin's console. "We can send position, status, and estimated arrival time." Together, we crafted a concise message detailing our situation. Submarine damaged at depth, ascending with compromised hull integrity, power systems unstable, estimated surface arrival in 3 hours, request immediate emergency response team standby. "Message away," Yasmin confirmed after we'd transmitted. "Signal received by support vessel Horizon." "Good," Rostova nodded. "Now we focus on—" A new alarm cut her off mid-sentence, this one a deep, pulsing tone I recognized immediately. The external systems warning. I spun back to my station and pulled up the satellite retrieval systems. The screen confirmed my worst fear. "Captain, the tether cable is unwinding too quickly," I shouted over the alarm. "The winch control is failing. The satellite's mass is pulling the cable out faster than the mechanism can handle." The display showed the retrieval cable spinning out at an alarming rate. If it continued, we'd lose the satellite entirely. Or worse, the uncontrolled unwinding could damage the external housing and create yet another breach point. "How long until complete failure?" Rostova demanded. "Minutes, maybe less," I replied, already pulling up the emergency procedures. "I need to perform an emergency lockdown on the tether system." "Do it," she ordered. The lockdown procedure was complex, requiring careful timing to avoid snapping the cable from sudden tension. I'd need to gradually engage the emergency brakes while simultaneously adjusting our ascent trajectory to minimize stress on both the cable and our already compromised hull. "Yasmin, I need continuous updates on our stability," I said, fingers poised over the controls. "Edwin, prepare to adjust trim on my mark." I began the sequence, watching the tether tension readings like a hawk. Too much pressure too quickly would snap the cable. Too little would fail to stop the unwinding. "Hull integrity at 74% and falling," Derek called out. The submarine shuddered as I engaged the first stage of the emergency brakes. The whole vessel tilted slightly as the satellite's weight pulled against our new trajectory. "Compensating," Edwin said, adjusting our trim to counteract the tilt. I continued the lockdown sequence, my hands steady despite the chaos around me. Another drop of water fell from the viewport crack, then another, forming a small puddle on the floor beneath. The temperature had fallen to 14 degrees now, and I could see my breath fogging in front of my face as I worked. I stared at the depth gauge as it clicked past 3,000 meters. We were making steady progress toward the surface, but a soft pattering sound drew my attention back to the viewport. The crack had widened despite our earlier efforts, and the temporary sealant was bubbling outward under pressure. "The patch is failing," I said, watching another drop of freezing water join the growing puddle on the floor. Sophia was already moving toward the emergency kit we'd left open near the viewport. "I need help applying a second layer," she said, her voice steady despite the situation. "This won't hold much longer." I left my station and joined her at the viewport. Up close, the crack looked worse, a thin spiderweb pattern spreading outward from the impact point. Water was seeping through at a faster rate now, one drop becoming a steady trickle. "Hold this," Sophia said, handing me a mixing tube as she prepared the new batch of sealant. Her fingers trembled from the cold, but her movements were precise. The control room temperature had dropped below 12 degrees, and our breath hung in puffs before our faces. "Pressure on the internal side," she instructed, and I pressed a sterile cloth against the weeping crack while she loaded the applicator gun. Edwin spoke from behind us. "We're climbing at 20 meters per minute. If we keep this up, we'll hit 1,000 meters in an hour and 40 minutes. "Good," I said, holding the cloth steady as Sophia applied the sealant around the crack. "The thinner pressure will make these patches work better the higher we go." The sealant was cold against my fingers, a thick gel that hardened almost immediately on contact with the water. Sophia worked methodically, building up a new layer over our previous attempt. When we finished, the patch looked more substantial, but I knew it was just buying us time. "That should slow the leak," Sophia said, though her tone lacked conviction. I returned to my station, leaving wet footprints across the metal floor, and checked the satellite status on my console. The tethers showed strain readings in the yellow zone, but the connections remained secure. "Satellite is still with us," I announced to the control room. "Tether integrity at 68% but holding." "The trim compensators are struggling," Edwin added, "but I'm managing the drag." Derek's voice cut through the control room, pitched slightly higher than normal. "I'm getting unusual readings from the satellite's nuclear battery." I turned toward him. "What kind of readings?" "Energy spikes. It looks like it's cycling." Derek's face was illuminated by the red warning indicators on his console. "I thought you said it was discharged." "It was," I replied, pulling up the external sensor data on my own screen. The numbers didn't make sense. The electrical output was increasing in regular pulses, growing stronger with each cycle. "Something's wrong." I switched to the external camera feed, focusing on the satellite trailing behind us. The image was grainy and dark, but I could make out the damaged section of the power housing. A faint blue glow pulsed from within the cracked casing. "The battery wasn't fully discharged," I said, feeling a cold that had nothing to do with the failing life support systems. "It looks like it's cycling back to active status." Captain Rostova moved beside me, studying the readouts. "Explain." "The KH-13's nuclear battery has a failsafe system," I said, looking at the technical specifications on my screen. "If it detects certain conditions, it tries to restore power to critical systems. The electrical discharge from the squid encounter must have triggered the restart protocol." "What are the implications?" Rostova asked, her breath visible in the cold air. I didn't hold back. "If that housing cracks during our ascent, we risk radiation contamination of a large part of the ocean. The pressure change as we rise could easily break those fractures." The control room fell silent except for the steady drip of water from the viewport and the hum of the straining engines. Options? Rostova finally asked, her gaze fixed on the external camera feed. We could jettison it now, Derek suggested. Leave it at this depth where the pressure would contain any leakage. Rostova shook her head. Our orders are explicit. That technology cannot be abandoned. We could try to stabilize the housing, I said, checking the manipulator arm status. We still have one functional arm. I might be able to use the emergency repair kit to reinforce the casing. Rostova considered this for a long moment. Do it. I adjusted my position at the console and activated the external manipulator systems. The primary arm had been damaged during our encounter with the squid, but the secondary arm was operational at reduced capacity. I extended it toward the satellite, moving slowly to avoid creating additional stress on the tethers. Yasmin, keep monitoring for any movement in the water around us, I instructed as I worked the controls. Edwin, try to minimize any sudden changes in our ascent pattern. The manipulator arm's camera gave me a closer view of the damage. The housing had a fracture running along one side, and the blue glow was pulsing more rapidly now. I reached for the external repair kit mounted on the manipulator arm's base. This is going to be delicate work, I muttered, mostly to myself. The arm's response was sluggish, and my first attempt to extract the repair materials almost ended with me dropping the entire kit into the depths below. The cold was making it harder to maintain fine motor control, and I had to pause and flex my fingers several times. As I worked, more systems failed around us. The air filtration sputtered, and another bank of lights went dark, leaving us in dim twilight, lit only by the glow of instrument panels. Hull integrity down to 62%, Derek reported. We're taking on more water through secondary seams. I ignored the distraction, focusing entirely on guiding the manipulator arm. I managed to extract a sheet of flexible metallic sealant from the kit and position it against the cracked housing. The arm's grip wasn't precise enough to apply it properly. I need more dexterity, I said through gritted teeth, adjusting the sensitivity settings beyond recommended levels. The manipulator arm jerked, and I nearly lost the sealant sheet. With painful slowness, I pressed the material against the housing and activated its adhesive backing. The first piece sealed in place, covering part of the fracture. I reached for a second piece. Suddenly, the submarine lurched violently to one side. My hand slipped off the controls, and the manipulator arm swung wildly, nearly tearing free from its mounting. "What the hell was that?" I shouted, scrambling to regain control of the arm. "Something's pulling on the satellite," Edwin yelled back, his hands flying across his navigation panel. I switched to the wider angle camera and felt my stomach drop. Through the murky water, I could see a massive tentacle wrapped around the satellite's main body. The creature had returned, or perhaps it was another one of its kind, and it was pulling the satellite downward with tremendous force. "It's got the satellite," I announced, my voice flat with disbelief. The submarine tilted further as the creature's pull transferred through the tethers, connecting us to the satellite. Warning alarms blared as our ascent stopped, then reversed. The depth meter began to tick upward again. We were being dragged back down. "Bennett, options," Rostova demanded, bracing herself against a console. I stared at the emergency release control for the tethers, then back at the screen showing the creature dragging our prize back toward the crushing depths. The decision before me was brutally simple. Cut the tether and lose the satellite completely, abandoning our mission and the dangerous technology it contained, or remain connected and risk having our already damaged submarine pulled back down to depths that would certainly crush us all. I placed my hand on the emergency tether release and looked at Rostova. "Captain, we need to cut it loose. Now." Her face tightened. The satellite contains classified technology. Our orders won't matter if we're all dead, I said, fingers hovering over the release. She stared at the screens showing our descent rate increasing. I could see her weighing our lives against the mission. The hull groaned under the increasing pressure. "Do it," she finally said, her voice flat. I slammed my palm against the emergency release. The control panel confirmed the action with a series of rapid beeps as the hydraulic clamps disengaged. On the external camera feed, I watched the satellite begin to drift away, the massive shape of the creature still wrapped around it. Wait. I leaned closer to the screen. Something's wrong. The separation wasn't clean. One of the creature's tentacles had wrapped not just around the satellite, but had also ensnared part of our external sensor array. The digital depth gauge confirmed my fear. We were still being pulled downward. "Bennett, what's happening?" Rostova demanded, her knuckles white against the edge of the console. "The tentacle. It's caught on our external equipment. We're still connected." I didn't wait for permission this time. I spun back to the controls and reactivated the laser system we'd used earlier. The power indicators flickered as I brought the targeting system online, the submarine's compromised power grid struggling to supply the necessary energy. "Everyone hold on," I called out. "I need to cut us free." The external camera feed showed the tentacle clearly, its massive form stretched taut between the sinking satellite and our hull. I carefully aligned the laser's targeting reticle, aware that one wrong move could damage our already compromised hull. "Firing," I announced, and pressed the activation control. The blue-white beam lanced through the water, striking the tentacle where it wrapped around our equipment. The creature's flesh sizzled and parted under the intense heat. The tentacle severed cleanly, and I felt a surge of relief as the satellite and creature continued their descent without us. My relief lasted exactly 2 seconds. The control panel exploded in a shower of sparks. The laser system had drawn too much power from our damaged grid, causing a massive surge through multiple circuits. I threw myself backward as electricity arced across the panel. "Power spike," Derek shouted from his station. "Multiple systems overloading." The acrid smell of electrical smoke filled the control room. A small fire erupted from the panel where I'd been standing moments before. Derek grabbed an extinguisher from the wall and rushed forward. I joined him, using my jacket to smother smaller flames sprouting from adjacent circuits. "Primary systems failing," Edwin called out from navigation. "Switching to backups." We managed to put out the fire, but the damage was done. The control panel was a charred mess, and the smell of burnt plastic and insulation hung heavy in the air. "Status report," Rostova ordered, her voice steady despite everything. "The satellite is gone," I said, turning away from the ruined panel. "We're no longer being pulled down, but we've lost significant systems in the power surge." Derek ran a quick diagnostic. Hull integrity holding at 58%. Primary life support damaged. Secondary life support online but running at reduced capacity. The situation was grim. With the satellite lost, our mission had failed. Now our only priority was survival. "We need to conserve power and focus on ascent," I said, moving to the environmental controls. What I saw there made my stomach drop. Life support is showing only 4 hours of oxygen at current consumption rates. Rostova looked at each of us. 4 hours is enough. We can make it to the surface in 3 if we maintain our current ascent rate. I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. We needed to get as many systems back online as possible to ensure we made it up safely. For the next hour, we worked frantically. I crawled into access panels with Derek, rerouting power connections and bypassing damaged circuits. Sophia helped seal off non-essential compartments to conserve oxygen. Edwin and Yasmin maintained our ascent trajectory while monitoring external conditions. Main propulsion at 60%, Derek reported as we finished reconnecting a particularly stubborn power coupling. That's the best we're going to get without replacement parts. I wiped sweat from my face, despite the dropping temperature in the control room. It'll have to do. We returned to the main control room where Edwin was frowning at his navigation display. "What's wrong?" I asked, noticing his concern. "Our ascent rate is slower than it should be," he said. "We should be passing 2,000 meters by now, but we're still at 2,400. I moved to check the ballast system status. Something didn't add up. With our current power to the thrusters, we should have been rising faster. "I need to check something," I said, pulling up the external diagnostic cameras. I cycled through different views of the submarine's hull until I spotted the problem. Water was flowing into our ballast tanks through damaged external vents. The creature's attack had compromised more than just our hull integrity. "We're taking on water," I announced. "The emergency ballast vents were damaged in the attack. They're not holding pressure." "Can we seal them?" Rostova asked. I shook my head. "Not from in here. They'd need to be repaired from outside." Everyone went quiet, knowing what that meant. At this depth, outside repair was impossible. I ran the numbers in my head, calculating our remaining ascent time against our oxygen supply. It wasn't good. "At this rate, we won't reach the surface before our oxygen runs out," I said. Derek checked his own calculations. "He's right. We're looking at 4.5 hours to surface minimum." "Options," Rostova demanded. I stared at the environmental control panel, an idea forming. A desperate one. "We could use our remaining compressed air reserves to purge the ballast tanks," I said. "Force out the water and increase our buoyancy." Sophia immediately grasped the implications. "But those air reserves are our emergency breathing supply. If life support fails completely, we die," I finished. "But if we stay on this ascent trajectory, we run out of oxygen before reaching the surface anyway." Rostova considered for only a moment. "How much would it improve our ascent rate?" "Enough to get us to the surface in just under 3 hours, I estimated. But it's all or nothing. Once we commit the air reserves, there's no going back." The control room fell silent as everyone processed the choice before us. Use our safety net to improve our chances of reaching the surface, or keep it as insurance against total life support failure. Rostova looked each crew member in the eye before turning back to me. "Do it, Bennett. Purge the tanks." I pressed the ballast purge control and held my breath. The roar of compressed air flooded through the submarine systems, pushing water out of the tanks with incredible force. My eyes fixed on the depth gauge, watching as the needle began to move faster. "It's working," I said, unable to hide the relief in my voice. Ascent rate just doubled. We're climbing at nearly 40 meters per minute now. Derek moved beside me, his face lit by the dim emergency lighting. "We need to redistribute power again." The purge strained the electrical system. We hunched over the systems panel, our shoulders touching as we worked. I could see our breath misting in front of us. Derek's fingers moved quickly, bypassing damaged circuits and rerouting power through secondary systems. "If we cut power to the rear compartments entirely, we can maintain critical systems for another hour and 15 minutes, Derek said, pointing to a schematic on his tablet. "That should be enough." "Do it," I agreed. "We can manage without those sections." Across the control room, Sophia pulled open a compartment and began removing oxygen masks. The hard plastic cases clicked as she stacked them on the central console. "Everyone needs to conserve oxygen," she announced, distributing the masks. Use them only if you start feeling lightheaded. The emergency supply will give us an extra 30 minutes if we need it. I took a mask from her and hung it around my neck, ready to use if necessary. The weight of it felt reassuring against my chest. 2,000 meters, Edwin called out, his voice cutting through the hum of the straining engines. Ascent is stable. I focused on our systems, watching the flickering indicators. The next half hour passed in silence, interrupted by status updates and adjustments. Each minute brought us closer to the surface and pushed our damaged systems toward failure. Bennett, Yasmin's voice broke through my concentration. Her tone had changed. There was hope in it. We just passed the 1,000-meter mark. I looked up from my console. 1,000? You're sure? Positive, she confirmed, adjusting her headphones. We're within potential rescue depth now. If we had to abandon ship, surface teams could theoretically reach us. That news brought relief to the control room. Even Rostova's expression softened. Edwin raised his hand suddenly. I'm getting something on the emergency frequency. His fingers moved across his console, adjusting settings. Signal strength increasing. I've got clear communications with the horizon. He switched the transmission to the main speakers, and a voice filled the control room. Clear, professional, concerned. Mariana Explorer, this is Support Vessel Horizon. We received your emergency beacon. Please respond with status and condition. Over. I moved to the communications panel as Edwin made space for me. Taking the microphone, I pressed the transmit button. Horizon, this is Mariana Explorer. Engineer Bennett speaking. We have a critical situation. I tried to keep my voice even, professional. Hull integrity compromised at multiple points. Life support systems damaged. Oxygen reserves at approximately 1 hour remaining. Ascending at maximum possible speed with compromised ballast systems. Current depth approximately 900 meters and climbing. I paused, then added, we require immediate emergency assistance upon surfacing. Possible injuries on board and significant water intake in forward compartments. The response came quickly. Copy that, Mariana Explorer. We have your position tracked. Emergency teams are standing by. Medical personnel, damage control specialists, and evacuation helicopters all preparing. Continue your ascent. We'll be waiting. Over. As I returned to my station, a sharp pain shot through my ears. I winced and pressed my hands to the sides of my head. The others around me were doing the same. The rapid ascent was causing pressure changes too fast for us to handle. Pressure equalizing too fast, I said through gritted teeth. My eardrums felt like they might rupture at any moment. I swallowed repeatedly, trying to relieve the pressure, but the pain only intensified. Sophia noticed our discomfort and moved quickly around the control room. Pinch your nose and try to exhale gently through it, she instructed, demonstrating the technique. It'll help equalize the pressure in your middle ear. I followed her instructions, feeling some slight relief, but the pain remained as our ascent continued. Just as I was checking the depth gauge again, we'd passed 700 meters. A sharp cracking sound echoed through the control room. For a moment, everyone froze. Then we all looked toward the viewport. The crack, I said, as the horror of realization hit me. The hairline fracture that Sophia and I had patched twice was now spreading across the viewport, water seeping through. As we watched, the crack expanded with a sharp sound, and a spray of seawater shot into the control room, hitting the opposite wall. It's giving way, I shouted, rushing toward the forward bulkhead controls. Rostova was already there, her hands moving across the emergency panel. We need to seal off the forward compartment, she ordered. Bennett, help me with the manual override. I reached the panel, and together we twisted the two emergency handles simultaneously. Hydraulic systems engaged with a groan, and a thick metal door began to lower between the forward viewport and the main control room. "Everyone back," Rostova commanded. The spray of water intensified, becoming a steady stream that splashed across the floor. The bulkhead door continued its descent, agonizingly slow. "Come on," I muttered, hoping it would move faster. Just as the water spray became a concerning gush, the bulkhead slammed into place with a metallic thud. Sealing mechanisms engaged automatically, and the flow of water stopped. We'd contained the breach, but lost access to the forward compartment and several critical systems. "Depth?" Rostova demanded. 300 meters, Edwin reported. "Estimated surface time in 7 minutes at current ascent rate." I returned to my station, rerouting systems to account for the sealed compartment. Our reserves were nearly depleted, but we just might make it. 200 meters, Edwin called out minutes later. "Almost there." I allowed myself a small smile. We were going to make it. Against impossible odds, we were going to reach the surface. Then the lights went out. Every screen and system shut down at once, leaving us in darkness. The engines went silent, and all we could hear was our breathing. "Power failure," Derek called out, his voice unnervingly loud in the darkness. "Final reserves depleted." Emergency lights flickered on as Sophia activated them, filling the control room with a green glow. I saw the fear on everyone's faces as the submarine shifted. "We're losing buoyancy," I said, grabbing the edge of my console as the deck tilted slightly. Without power to the ballast systems, we couldn't maintain our ascent. "We're starting to sink again." The depth gauge glowed in the dark, confirming my fears. The needle had stopped rising and was starting to drop, 50 meters from the surface, and we were sinking back into the abyss. "Options, Bennett?" Rostova's voice cut through the panic, steady and commanding. My mind raced through our options. There was only one left, and it was dangerous. "The emergency ballast release," I said. "It's a manual system independent of the power grid, designed as an absolute last resort. It'll explosively decompress all tanks simultaneously." "What are the risks?" Rostova asked, her face serious in the green light. "It's violent. Extremely violent. Could tear damaged sections of the hull apart completely, but it'll get us to the surface." Rostova looked at each crew member in turn, then back to me. "Do it." I moved to the far wall where a red metal box was mounted. Breaking the safety glass with my elbow, I pulled the emergency handle down and twisted it to the right. "Brace for decompression," I shouted. "Hold on to something sturdy." I twisted the handle fully and slammed it home. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the entire submarine shuddered violently. A deafening roar surrounded us as every ballast tank explosively purged its contents at once. The deck lurched upward with such force that my feet left the floor. I crashed against the ceiling, then fell back down hard as the submarine rocketed toward the surface. Equipment tore loose from mountings, flying across the control room. Sophia slammed against a bulkhead. Edwin was thrown from his chair. I grabbed a support strut, holding on with every ounce of strength as the submarine bucked and shook. The depth gauge needle spun as we shot upward through the last 50 meters of water. The pressure changes made my ears pop. My vision darkened as the G-forces threatened to knock me out. Then came the impact, a massive jolt as we burst through the ocean surface. The submarine rolled violently to one side, then stabilized, bobbing like a cork on the waves. Through the remaining intact viewport, I saw darkness outside, but not the darkness of the deep ocean. This darkness was scattered with pinpricks of light. Stars. Countless stars in the night sky above us. We'd made it to the surface. I looked up as a crew member from the horizon reached down. grabbing my arm and hauling me over the edge of the recovery ship's deck. My legs wobbled when they hit solid metal, the sensation of a non-moving surface almost alien after days in the rocking submarine. Salt water dripped from my uniform, forming small puddles around my feet. "You good to stand?" asked the crewman who'd pulled me up. I nodded, though my knees felt like they might give out. The bright afternoon sun hit my eyes, making me squint after hours in the dim emergency lighting of the Mariana Explorer. Behind me, our submarine looked pathetic, listing badly to one side, with only about a third of its bulk still visible above the waves. I watched as other rescue personnel helped Edwin up the ladder. His glasses were missing, and a cut above his eye had left a trail of dried blood down the side of his face. "Bennett," I heard Rostova's voice before I saw her. She stood a few meters away, already wrapped in a gray thermal blanket, her usually perfect hair matted to her head. "Get yourself checked out." I glanced across the deck, taking in the controlled chaos as the Horizon's crew worked to secure our damaged vessel with heavy cables. Medical personnel bustled around, attending to my teammates. Sophia sat on a bench while someone examined the bruise darkening across her forehead. Derek had his sleeve rolled up as a medic wrapped bandages around his forearm. They looked beaten up, but alive. We all made it. A young medic approached me, gesturing toward a makeshift assessment area. "Sir, if you'll come with me." I followed her, looking back at our submarine. The Mariana Explorer had taken us nearly 5 miles down and somehow brought us back. Despite its engineering, it had almost been our coffin. All because of something science said didn't exist anymore. The next hours passed in a blur of medical checks, warm showers, dry clothes, and hot food that I barely tasted. My thoughts kept drifting back to the massive tentacles, that ancient eye staring through our viewport. Eventually, we gathered in the Horizon's conference room for debriefing. The captain of the recovery vessel sat at one end of the table with 2 company representatives in crisp suits beside him. One wore a security badge that suggested government connections rather than corporate ones. "We need to understand exactly what happened down there," said the older suit, a thin man with steel-gray hair who'd introduced himself as Marshall. The satellite recovery was the primary objective. Rostova sat up in her chair. "We found pressure anomalies at depth. The Mariana Explorer's structure was compromised." "And the KH-13?" asked the younger suit. "We made contact with the satellite," Rostova replied evenly, "but were forced to jettison during our emergency ascent." Marshall's mouth tightened into a thin line. So the mission was a failure. No one spoke for a moment. I felt a flash of anger rising in my throat. We'd nearly died down there, and all they cared about was their satellite. "The crew survived," Rostova said firmly. "I consider that a success." The debriefing continued for another 2 hours. Each of us gave our account, carefully following Rostova's lead about pressure anomalies and equipment failures. No one mentioned the creature, not once. As we broke for a short recess, I overheard 2 crew members from the Horizon talking in low voices near the coffee station. "Russian vessel about 30 miles out," one was saying. "Disappeared from radar right after these guys sent their distress call." "You think they were looking for the same thing?" "Probably. Left in a hurry once the Mariana surfaced." I moved away before they noticed me listening. The thought of another vessel out there, waiting and watching while we struggled for our lives, made my skin crawl. Had they known about the satellite's location? About the creatures below? When we reconvened, a Coast Guard representative had joined the meeting via video call, asking specifically about what had damaged our hull. I watched Rostova as she answered, her face revealing nothing. "As I said in my report, we faced pressure anomalies and equipment failure. The viewport was damaged during ascent. Not a single word about massive tentacles or prehistoric squids that shouldn't exist. Nothing about the creature that had tried to drag us back down to the trench. The company men nodded, typing notes into their tablets. After the meeting, I walked out onto the deck. Night had fallen, and the ocean spread out around us, broken only by the lights of our ship. I leaned against the railing, staring down at the water. Somewhere below, creatures swam through the darkness, hunting for heat or light. How many extinct species might be down there, hidden from human eyes for millions of years? I'd never look at the ocean the same way again. Back in my assigned cabin, I pulled out my personal tablet and began typing. I documented everything. The descent, the satellite, the first tentacle contact, the giant eye staring through our viewport, the struggle to escape. I described the size of the creatures, their behavior, their apparent attraction to the satellite's nuclear power source. I wasn't sure if I'd ever show it to anyone, but I needed to record what had really happened while it was still fresh in my mind. My door clicked open, and I quickly switched screens. Yasmin stood in the doorway, her eyes darting down the corridor before she slipped inside and closed the door. "I wanted to talk to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She sat on the edge of the bunk opposite mine and pulled a small data drive from her pocket. "I saved something during the ascent." "What is it?" I asked, though I already suspected. "Sonar recordings." She turned the drive over in her fingers. Clear as day, multiple massive biological entities, exactly where we encountered them. The size readings are, well, they match what we saw. I stared at the tiny device. Physical evidence. Proof that what we'd seen wasn't some shared hallucination brought on by pressure or oxygen deprivation. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" I asked. Yasmin shook her head. "Just you." I made a copy before they collected all our equipment. The company's already wiping the Mariana's databanks. Standard procedure for failed missions. "Rostova knows what you did?" "No." Her eyes met mine. "Not yet. I'm not sure what to do with it." I looked at the drive, then at my tablet where my own account was saved. Some secrets from the deep might be impossible to keep hidden. Yasmin nodded slowly. "Like the questions that'll haunt us every time we close our eyes." The Horizon's engines hummed as we headed back to port. I could still see that massive eye staring at us through the viewport, ancient and alive when science said it shouldn't be. I wondered how many other impossible things were waiting to be discovered and whether we were ready for them.